as a co-chair of the Conservative Party. Part of your job is running those election campaigns. You've won the seat, much reduced majority, lower turnout in a by-election, of course, but a swing of 10% to Labour. Bit of a worry, isn't it?
Well, I think it was a good result, actually, and we got over 50% of the vote, particularly given when we're in a midterm situation. I think that's a good result and tribute to Louis French and the campaign that was fought down there. As to Labour, Keir Starmer didn't even bother turning up for the by-election, and Labour polled about what they got under Jeremy Corbyn in 2017. So I'm not massively worried about that.
Are you worried at all about the Reform Party coming third? Only sort of 6.6% of the vote. However, a small swing to Labour, Reform Party on the other side taking some Conservative votes, could cause some worries at the next general election, couldn't it?
Well, look, of course, people have concerns, and particularly midterm. That's why I take from this result that the government needs to continue to focus on getting on with the job and delivering. So, for example, just next week, we will be back before Parliament our Borders and Nationality Bill, which will tackle small boats, for example, by increasing to life sentence, the maximum sentence for those vile people smugglers. And by the way, I hope Labour and the Lib Dems actually turn out and support it this time. So that's the focus that I take from it. In respect of reform, I remember when UKIP were winning by-elections. You remember Clacton? I think that was back in 2014, was it?
Okay, well, you've got another by-election coming up in North Shropshire. Very different circumstances. This Old Bexley by-election coming back from the very, very sad death of a very well-respected and much-loved local MP in James Brokenshire. North Shropshire, very much more associated with the sleaze allegations the government's been wrestling with in Patterson's seat, of course, and him resigning after being reprimanded in Parliament, facing that vote to be suspended. Going to be a very different circumstance, and we understand Labour are going to be, throwing the kitchen sink at this one.
Well, we'll see whether Labour do actually throw the kitchen sink at it. As I say, Sadiq Khan and Keir Starmer didn't bother turning up in Bexley. It'll be interesting to see whether they turn up in North Shropshire. But I agree with you, it will, of course, be a challenging by-election, as all by-elections are midterm. We have to fight to make sure that people turn out to support our candidates, and we need to demonstrate that we are focused on getting on with the job and delivering. That's why we're tackling COVID. For example, you saw the very good news about the boosters this morning. That vindicates the decision we've taken on investing on Moderna and Pfizer, and I'd urge everyone to take their booster. That's why we're continuing to invest in our hospitals, additional resources being announced this morning for it, and we continue to focus on the economy with rising job vacancies, falling unemployment, and strong growth. That's where we have to be focused as a government.
All right, and again, a lot of people are going to get very concerned about those rising prices, and the energy prices in particular as well. But let's focus on COVID, as you brought that up. As you said, we've got encouraging data on the vaccinations and the efficacy of those boosters, and also some would say quite encouraging data coming out initial, again, still a bit too early to say, from South Africa and also Israel about the Omicron variant. Definitely looks like it is more transmissible. Doesn't look like it is able to escape the vaccines, but also it doesn't appear, early stages yet, we can't be sure yet, but it doesn't appear to be creating more severe cases. So it may well be the case, more people are going to catch it, but we're not going to see as high a percentage getting seriously ill. Does that mean the government, if that is the case, I realise it is too soon to say, but if that is the case in a couple of weeks at the review on the 20th of December, that the government will rule out any further restrictions in this country?
The short answer is yes. Portendown and others are currently examining the virus. I think we've got the balance about right, a sensible and proportionate set of steps. I would also say to any of your listeners or indeed viewers who are concerned about this, I understand their concerns, but I think people should keep calm and carry on with their Christmas plans. I don't think there's a need to cancel and so on, as long as they wear the masks in the new settings as advised. And of course, we very much tightened up the travel restrictions. I'm confident we've got the balance right. And as we've said, we'll review that after 3 weeks. And if we can remove those additional restrictions, of course, we will do so.
But again, you see, you've got the balance right. But of course, no one's quite sure what the balance is, because we've had, Jenny Harries. I know she's an advisor to the government, but they've pretty much been setting government policy a lot of the time, those scientific advisors. She was saying, you should be restricting what you do over Christmas. No unnecessary socialising. She said, Boris Johnson saying, no, go out, go and do what you want. Therese Coffey, the World Convention Secretary, saying don't snog someone under the mistletoe. Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, saying yes, go ahead. It's not really going to be a surprise with the travel restrictions concerned about this variant that we're seeing mass cancellations and of hospitality, Christmas parties, meals out, people scaling down their Christmas plans, travel being cancelled as a result of those restrictions, the PCR test and the self-isolation, companies cancelling their bashes for their staff who've worked all year. This was always going to happen when we had new restrictions brought in. I mean, the government created this problem.
Well, I would actually say it's the South African variant that has caused us.
I don't know. Genuinely, I don't know anyone who's afraid of the variant more than they're afraid of having to self-isolate because they've been coming in contact with someone and having to be off work for 10 days, or not being able to see their family at Christmas, or not being able to get off a plane and go to work the next day. The change in the rules is what is bothering people that I know.
Well, we saw in respect of the Delta variant, it is important that when these new variants emerge, we take some sensible, proportionate steps for the short term whilst we understand the nature of it. But I do genuinely understand the concerns. There may well be people who own pubs and restaurants listening to this show. That's why Prime Minister has been clear, and I'm being clear this morning to people, you don't need to cancel your Christmas plans. Keep calm. Carry on with your plans. We've got the balance right now, and I hope that we'll be able to remove the additional restrictions if our understanding of the virus permits us to do so.
In terms of restrictions, Germany yesterday, under Angela Merkel, one of her last acts as Chancellor, has looked at going in the footsteps of Austria, mandating jabs from next February for everybody and lockdowns for the unvaccinated only. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's not something that we want to do or plan to do in the United Kingdom. And the reason why we don't want to and won't hopefully have to do any of that is because of the booster. People are taking that booster. That is building up the wall again. The evidence on its efficacy is very promising this morning. So as long as people, when they get the call up, take that booster jab, it'll be open to everyone by the end of January. I'm confident that we put people up and we will be able to withstand, even given the challenges of this new
What I just heard, Mr. Dowden, was if you get the jab, we won't have to force you to get the jab. You said it's not something we want to do or plan to do or hopefully won't have to do. There's a really, really simple answer, which is this is wrong and we will never do it. Why won't you say that?
I do not agree in principle, if that helps you on the principled argument, with mandating vaccines, forcing people to have vaccines. What I said to you, though, is that the reason why we won't have to contemplate those sort of decisions is because of the efficacy of the vaccine, the booster. So
we can rule it out then, can't we? So we can say this government, of which I am a part, I'm Conservative chairman, will never, ever, under any circumstances, bring in mandatory jabs and never put in a lockdown for those who are unvaccinated. I think that's a really easy statement for anyone who lives in a liberal democracy to be able to say, and I'm stunned that politicians across the board in this country aren't making that statement.
Julia, I think I pretty much said that.
Would you mind using those words then?
The sort of, I'm not following journalistic trips of never ever, etc. I've said I disagree with it profoundly in principle, and I've also said to you that we have the tools to prevent us ever having to do that because
to do it. That's the thing. It's always the proviso. We don't want to, that's what we've heard throughout. We had it, the day before we went into lockdown 3 in January, the Prime Minister didn't want to close schools, and then he did it. We keep being told the reason why so many people who listen to my show are so scared and untrusting is because we keep being told that government doesn't want to do these things, and then it happens. I think that if one is opposed to something in principle and thinks that it's morally wrong to have a lockdown for the unvaccinated, to punish people for not getting medical treatment, to force people to have medical treatment they don't want for whatever reason, I think that if that is a moral and principled position, then it is also one that is backed up in practice.
Well, in respect of lockdowns, and Julia, you and I have discussed this many times before, how much I despise lockdowns. And by the way, I know that we'll have a terrible long tail of the mental health and other consequence of it. It's not a decision I, as a member of the cabinet, took lightly to support, but I did support it because I believed that the consequences of not doing so were much, much worse in terms of hospitals being overwhelmed. Now, the point I keep going back to is we're in a different world now to where we were at the beginning of this year, thanks to the vaccine and thanks to the booster. But
so we can rule out mandating vaccines.
But Julia, listen, we have to keep in this world, and the way we keep in this world is by making sure people keep on taking the booster. As long as we keep on doing that, we avoid having to contemplate any of these things. And it's not a principle.
It's not a principle, then, is it?
I despise it.
That's not a principle.
In principle,
you either know it's wrong or you don't. Simple as that. If it's wrong, you don't ever do it.
In governing, as in many other situations, we have to take some very difficult decisions. We took that decision in order to save lives and stop the NHS being overwhelmed. And I trust we will never have to make a decision like that again because of the efficacy of the vaccine.
I have a funny feeling that's not going to be good enough for an awful lot of my listeners. Just finally, I must ask you about one of the other fallouts from lockdowns, and that is the terrible, terrible death of Arthur Labinio Hughes, 6-year-old boy who was tortured and murdered by his stepmother and father during lockdown, despite repeated efforts by people to raise the alarm to social workers. Seen, of course, on telephone calls rather than properly looked at. Not going to school, so no trusted adults to go to seek help while he was starved and poisoned with salt and beaten. The front page of The Sun today asks, did they learn nothing from Baby P? Have we learned anything from Baby P?
Well, look, this was an absolutely disgusting and sickening case, and I'm sure all of your listeners share our revulsion at the terrible treatment of this little boy. There are clearly some very serious questions to be answered by the local authorities. I understand that there is a local child safeguarding practice review going on now to learn those lessons, and that will include the outcome of this case as well.
Yeah, it is absolutely horrific. But many were saying, the child hadn't been in lockdown. The child had been at school. Someone would have spotted him being starved and poisoned and beaten.
Well, it's just appalling, and that's the terrible sadness of this.
Oliver Dowden, really appreciate you joining us. He's